My name's Elena. I'm 29 and I live in a small town in the Midwest. From the outside, my life looks perfect. I mean, I have everything people say you're supposed to want: a loving husband, a stable job, a nice house, and even a dog. But here's the thing. Lately, I've been feeling like I'm living someone else's life. Like I'm just going through the motions and I can't shake this emptiness inside. Let me start with Mark. He's a good man, really. Kind, reliable, and the kind of guy who always does the right thing. We've been married for 5 years, and he's never given me a reason to doubt him. He's the type who remembers anniversaries, fixes things around the house without being asked, and always asks how my day was. But here's the problem. He's predictable. Safe. And I hate admitting this, but I think I've started to resent him for it. It's not that I don't love him, I do. But over the past year or so, I've felt this growing restlessness. Like there's something missing. I've tried to ignore it, telling myself that this is just what adulthood looks like. You grow up, you settle down, and you trade excitement for stability. But the truth is, I've been feeling invisible. Like I'm just playing a role. The dutiful wife, the responsible adult. And I've lost sight of who I really am. I didn't even realize how bad it had gotten until my stepdad, Max, came to visit. Max has always been this larger-than-life figure in my life. He's not my biological dad. He married my mom when I was a teenager. But he's always had this magnetic energy that draws people to him. He's confident, charming, and totally unpredictable. Growing up, I idolized him in a way. He was the complete opposite of my quiet, reserved mom, and he made me feel seen in a way no one else did. When Max arrived for his visit, it was like a breath of fresh air. He brought this energy into our house that had been missing for so long. He told stories about his travels, cracked jokes that made me laugh until my sides hurt, and just had this way of making everything feel more alive. Being around him again stirred up feelings I thought I'd buried a long time ago. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Just nostalgia, maybe. But then I started noticing little things. The way he'd look at me when we talked. The way his voice softened when he said my name. And I couldn't help but feel this pull toward him. It was like he saw me. The real me. In a way Mark hadn't in years. I know how this sounds. Trust me, I do. Max is my stepdad, and there are a million reasons why this is wrong. But in that moment, it didn't feel wrong. It felt like I was finally waking up after being asleep for so long. Like I was alive again. The night everything changed, we were all sitting around the dinner table, Mark, Max, and me. Mark was talking about work, like he always does, and I was nodding along, pretending to listen. But my mind was somewhere else. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Max had smiled at me earlier, like he knew exactly what I was feeling. After dinner, Mark went to bed early. He had to be up for work the next morning. But Max and I stayed up, talking and drinking wine. At first, it was innocent. We talked about old memories, about my mom, about life. But then the conversation shifted, and suddenly it felt like there was this electricity between us. I don't even remember who made the first move. But before I knew it, we were kissing. I know how this sounds. I know it's wrong. But in that moment, I didn't care. It felt like I was finally breaking free from this cage I'd been living in. Like I was finally alive. The next morning, I woke up feeling sick with guilt. I couldn't even look Mark in the eye. But at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about Max. About the way he made me feel. And that's when I realized how deep I was in. I don't know where this is going or how it's going to end. All I know is that my life will never be the same. And as much as I hate myself for what I've done, I can't help but wonder if this is my chance to finally start living for myself. I'm married to a great guy named Mark, but I've been feeling stuck, empty, like I'm living someone else's life. And then my stepdad Max came to visit and everything changed. It started innocently enough. Max has always been this magnetic, larger-than-life figure in my life. And when he showed up, it was like a spark in the monotony of my everyday routine. We'd talk for hours about life, about my mom, about his travels. He has this way of making you feel like you're the only person in the room, like you matter. And I hadn't felt that way in a long time. At first, it was just conversations, lingering glances, a few glasses of wine after dinner while Mark was in bed. But then, one night, something shifted. Mark had gone to bed early, again, because he had work the next morning. Max and I stayed up like we had been doing, but this time the energy between us was different. It was like the air was charged, and neither of us could ignore it. We were sitting on the couch, talking, and then there was this moment of silence. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like we both knew something was about to happen. And then it did. I don't even remember who made the first move. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was him. All I know is that 1 second we were sitting there, and the next we were kissing. And it wasn't just a kiss. It was like everything I'd been feeling. All the emptiness and frustration and longing just poured out of me. In that moment, I didn't care that it was wrong. I didn't care about Mark, or about the fact that Max is my stepdad. All I cared about was how alive I felt. We didn't talk about it afterward. Max just looked at me, his expression unreadable, and then he went to the guest room. I stayed on the couch, my heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to run after him, to keep chasing that feeling. But another part of me was already drowning in guilt. The next morning, I woke up feeling sick. Not physically sick, but sick with guilt. Mark was in the kitchen, making coffee like nothing had happened, and I couldn't even look him in the eye. How could I? I just betrayed him in the worst way possible. But here's the thing. As much as I hated myself for what I'd done, I couldn't stop thinking about Max. About the way he'd looked at me, the way he'd made me feel. It was like I'd been sleepwalking through my life, and he'd woken me up. And I didn't want to go back to sleep. Over the next few days, Max and I didn't talk about what had happened. But it was there, hanging between us. Every time we were in the same room, I could feel it in the way he looked at me, in the way his voice softened when he said my name. And I knew it wasn't over. One night, Mark had to work late, and Max and I were alone again. This time, there was no pretending. We both knew why we were staying up, why we were sitting so close on the couch. And when it happened again, it wasn't just a kiss. I'm not going to go into details because this isn't that kind of post. But I will say this. It felt like freedom. Like I was finally breaking out of this cage I'd been living in. And in that moment, I didn't care about the consequences. Afterward, though, the guilt came crashing down. I couldn't stop thinking about Mark, about how kind he is, how much he trusts me. And I hated myself for betraying him. But at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about Max, about the way he made me feel. We kept it a secret, of course. Mark had no idea, and I told myself it was just a mistake, something I could move past. I convinced myself that if I just pretended it never happened, I could go back to my normal life. But then I found out I was pregnant. At first, I tried to convince myself it was Mark's. But deep down, I knew the timing didn't add up. And when I did the math, there was no denying it. This wasn't Mark's baby. I didn't know what to do. I still don't. Part of me wants to tell Mark the truth, to come clean and face the consequences. But another part of me is terrified. Mark doesn't deserve this. He's been nothing but good to me, and I've betrayed him in the worst way possible. And then there's Max. He knows about the baby. I told him as soon as I found out. And his reaction? I don't even know how to describe it. He didn't freak out, like I thought he would. Instead, he just looked at me and said, "We'll figure this out." But what does that even mean? Does he want me to leave Mark and start a new life with him? Or is he just trying to avoid responsibility? I don't know. All I know is that my life is spiraling out of control and I don't know how to stop it. I'm meeting Max tomorrow to talk things through. I don't know what I'm going to say, or what he's going to say. But I do know this. Whatever happens, my life will never be the same. I'm stuck in a nightmare. Max wants me to leave Mark and start over with him. He says he loves me, that we're meant to be together. and part of me wants to believe him. But the other part of me is drowning in guilt. Mark doesn't deserve this. He's been nothing but good to me, and I've betrayed him in the worst way possible. I met Max yesterday to talk things through. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I couldn't keep living in this limbo. We met at a diner on the outskirts of town, somewhere no one would recognize us. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth by the window. He looked calm, like he didn't have a care in the world. I slid into the booth across from him, my hands shaking. I didn't know where to start, so I just blurted it out. "What are we going to do?" Max didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. And then he said, "We'll figure it out, Elena. You and me. We'll start over." "Start over?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "What does that even mean?" "It means we leave this town. We leave Mark. We start a new life together, just the two of us. And the baby." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Part of me had been expecting this, but hearing him say it out loud made it real. And for a moment, I let myself imagine it. A life with Max. A life where I didn't have to pretend anymore. Where I could be myself. But then the guilt came crashing down. "What about Mark?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He doesn't deserve this. He's been nothing but good to me, and I've betrayed him." Max reached across the table and took my hand. "I know it's not ideal," he said, "but sometimes you have to make hard choices to be happy. And you're not happy with Mark, Elena. You know you're not." He was right. I'm not happy with Mark, but that doesn't make this okay. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe Max, to believe that we could be happy together. But the other part of me was screaming that this was wrong, that I was about to destroy two lives, Mark's and my own. "What if I can't do it?" I asked, pulling my hand away. "What if I can't leave him?" Max's expression hardened. "Then you're going to spend the rest of your life living a lie," he said. "And I don't think that's what you want." He was right again. I don't want to live a lie, but I don't know if I'm strong enough to face the truth. We left the diner without saying much else. Max kissed me on the forehead before he got into his car, and I stood there, watching him drive away, feeling more lost than ever. Now I'm sitting here, trying to figure out what to do. Do I come clean and destroy everything? Do I tell Mark the truth and risk losing him forever? Or do I keep this secret and try to make it work with him, knowing that I'll always be living a lie? I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this. All I know is that my life will never be the same. I've been lying awake all night thinking about Mark, about how kind he is, how much he trusts me, and I hate myself for betraying him. But at the same time, I can't stop thinking about Max, about the way he makes me feel, about the life we could have together. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm strong enough to make the right choice. But I do know this. Whatever I decide, it's going to change everything. I've been stuck in this nightmare for weeks, torn between two impossible choices. Do I stay with Mark, the man who's been nothing but good to me, and live a lie for the rest of my life? Or do I leave him for Max, the man who makes me feel alive but also represents everything I've been taught is wrong? I've made my choice. It wasn't easy. It wasn't clean. And it definitely wasn't the right choice in the eyes of anyone else. But it's the choice I made, and I have to live with it. It started with a conversation. After weeks of sleepless nights and endless guilt, I finally sat down with Mark. I didn't tell him everything, not yet, but I told him enough. I told him I wasn't happy, that I felt like I was living someone else's life, that I needed more. Mark didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just looked at me, his expression a mix of confusion and hurt, and said, "What are you saying, Elena? Do you want to leave me?" I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. But then I nodded and the words came tumbling out. "I think so. Yes. "I'm so sorry, Mark. You don't deserve this, but I can't keep pretending." He didn't say much after that. He just sat there, staring at the floor, and then he got up and left. He stayed with a friend for a few days, and I didn't hear from him. I didn't blame him. During those days, I felt like I was drowning. The guilt was overwhelming, and part of me wanted to call Mark and tell him I'd made a mistake, that I wanted to work things out. But then Max would call or text, and I'd remember why I was doing this. Max. He's complicated. He's not the kind of man you'd expect to be the other guy. He's confident, sure, but he's also kind in his own way. And when he looks at me, I feel like he sees me, the real me, in a way Mark never did. When Mark finally came back, we had the conversation I'd been dreading. I told him everything. About Max, about the baby, about how I'd been feeling for months, maybe even years. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, and I'll never forget the look on his face. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just sat there, silent, for what felt like an eternity. And then he said, "I can't believe you'd do this to me, Elena." After everything we've been through. I didn't have a response. What could I say? He was right. I'd betrayed him in the worst way possible, and there was no excuse for that. Mark moved out the next day. He didn't fight me on it. He just packed his things and left, and I haven't heard from him since. I don't know if I ever will. Now I'm here, in this house that feels too big and too empty, trying to figure out what comes next. Max has been supportive, I guess. He's been there for me in ways I didn't expect, but it's not easy. There's still so much guilt, so much doubt. I don't know if I made the right choice. I don't know if there even is a right choice in a situation like this. All I know is that I couldn't keep living the way I was. I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. Max and I are trying to make it work. It's not perfect. Far from it. There are days when I wonder if I've made the biggest mistake of my life. But then there are moments when I look at him, and I feel that spark again. That feeling of being alive. The baby is due in a few months, and I'm terrified. I don't know what kind of mother I'll be, or what kind of life I'll be able to give this child. But I'm trying to believe that things will work out. That somehow this mess will turn into something beautiful. I don't know if I'll ever stop feeling guilty about what I did to Mark. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself. But I'm trying to move forward. Trying to believe that I deserve to be happy, even if I had to hurt someone to get there.